The GST Constitutional Amendment Bill has indeed been passed by the Rajya Sabha. It is the 122nd amendment to the Constitution of India. It's a momentous legislation and it has been passed unanimously. 197 total votes cast and 197 in favour. The only dissenting voices was the AIADMK. They opposed the bill on the floor of the House and they staged a last-minute walkout to ensure passage of that legislation. But even if they had stayed with the 12 members, this bill would have been a reality. So GST for India, it's an ET Now campaign, India for GST. We've been spearheading this and it is indeed becoming a reality. First with the Constitutional Amendment Bill becoming a reality as we speak.
That's right, Supriya. In fact, as we speak, I think they're voting on each of the specific amendments. So this is the next amendment on which we can see 187 votes in favour, 9 votes against, total of 196 votes, given the fact that the ADMK is walked out of the Rajya Sabha just ahead of the crucial vote. But it's pretty clear that the unanimous vote is in favour of the GST Constitutional Amendment Bill. So this is just going through the formality. So I think all of the Rajya Sabha will vote on each of the specific amendments. And correct me if I'm wrong, Supriya, but they're going to vote on each of the specific 4 or 5 amendments over the next few minutes, which is merely a formality, at the end of which it will be officially a done deal. But as things stand, it's fair to say the Rajya Sabha has passed the GST Amendment Bill almost unanimously. That's the big headline that's breaking on India tonight, this Wednesday evening. It's a historic day, you know, Supriya, whichever way you look at it, because who would have thought that after so much of back and forth, 10 years of political maneuvering, with various political governments, political establishments in power, finally, we are seeing a day where there seems to be a broad political consensus on the legislation that will govern this path-breaking reform, which is the goods and services tax. Much is going to change in this country as this reform, as this tax kicks in. It will have a massive impact on industry, on the broader economy, on you and me as well. And we're going to talk about all of that over the next few minutes. In fact, over the next few hours, actually. We've got a power-packed lineup of some of the biggest corporates, economists, foreign institutional investors joining us on this special telecast. We're going non-stop with the story till 12 midnight. In fact, we've been with this story all afternoon since 2 o'clock when that vote began. R. Seshasai, Chairman of Infosys, D. Shivkumar, Chairman of PepsiCo India, Banmali Agarwal, Head of GE India, R.C. Bhargav, Chairman of Maruti Suzuki. Can you get a bigger corporate lineup than that? They're going to be talking about the impact of GST on industry and the broader economy. That's the most power-packed lineup that you can think of this a crucial, historic Wednesday evening. Also coming up later on the show, we've got Rajiv Lal of IDFC. We've got two big CEOs from Internet Inc. That's Deep Kalra, CEO of Make My Trip, Vijay Shekhar Sharma of Paytm, and Harsh Mariwal of Marico as well, Chairman of Marico as well. So that's the power-packed corporate lineup that we've got for you over the next few minutes on India Tonight. But I want to go back to the live visuals that we're getting from Rajya Sabha to take stock of what's happening, because in about a minute or two from now, we're going to be joined live by a very special guest, Supriya, straight from the Finance Ministry. You want to take us through what's going on right now, Supriya, before we take it across straight to our live guest joining us from North Block.
So it is a clause-by-clause voting that's on, really, Sandeep. But the big headline of the day, I mean, keep those clauses aside, keep that differential voting aside. But the big headline of the day, and at 9:14 p.m. this evening, is that the Rajya Sabha has indeed passed the Constitutional Amendment Bill. And after that, remember, the states will have to ratify it. There will have to be a central GST and interstate GST that will come into effect, that will become a law. The GST Council then has to decide on the rate, the dual control, and all of those things. Because remember, as Mr. Chidambaram said, the heart of this legislation is the rate at which the GST will be set. There will, of course, be a rate for luxury items, and there will be a rate for mass consumption items, but the heart of the bill is going to be that. But clause by clause voting set aside, the reality is that GST is finally a reality in India today. It's been a reform in the making for the last 10 years, and it's taken politicians on both sides of the speaker to take turns and oppose the legislation. And which is why it is a game-changing legislation. It's going to change the way corporate India does business. It also will change the way you and I consume services and products. But it is indeed my pleasure to welcome on ET Now a very, very key bureaucrat in the Finance Ministry. Mr. Shaktikanta Das, the Department of Economic Affairs Secretary, joins us live right here on ET Now. He is, of course, in his previous avatar as Revenue Secretary, also helped the GST come in the form that it has. Mr. Das, we really appreciate you taking time out this evening and talking to us. But let's first begin by talking to you about this momentous legislation. How big a reform, according to you, is really the goods and the services tax? Reams of paper written on it, hours of television debate. We at ET Now have spearheaded a campaign that's India for the GST. But how important is this reform, according to you?
You see, I would like to mention 3 points in reply to your question. First, the GST changes completely transforms the fiscal architecture of modern India with regard to matters of taxation. After independence, this is the biggest tax reform, and why I say that it is changing the fiscal architecture is that because earlier the constitution had assigned the central excise and the service tax which the center was imposing and collecting, and the sales tax which became later on the VAT which the states were collecting. Now both these indirect forms of taxations are merged. The constitution makes a provision whereby these two tax structures, these two tax systems are merged. So therefore it completely transforms the fiscal architecture. Secondly, in a way it restores a kind of a fiscal balance between the states and the center, because service tax in particular, which was collected by the center, which was actually levied and collected by the center, now the states get also equal power to levy and collect service tax. Earlier, a part of the service tax collected by the center was devolved to the states as a part of the Finance Commission recommendations, but now the states have a power to levy and collect service tax. Third, and perhaps very important, is that GST will completely transform the way the business is done in India, the way industry is run in India. It will bring in a lot of efficiency into the Indian economy by way of reducing transaction costs, by way of over a period of time lowering the tax rates and rationalizing the tax rates, and also by way of faster movement of goods and goods across the country. When I say it will reduce transaction costs, let me give one example. According to some estimates, today when a truck moves from one location to another location in the country, on an average it takes about 48 hours at various checkposts. Under GST, you have one India, one tax, the entire India becomes a common market, and therefore this time which is spent waiting at various checkposts will go, goods will move much faster. Together with the dedicated freight corridor project which the government is implementing, and the other railway projects and the road projects which the government is implementing, I think it will bring in, GST will bring in a lot of efficiency into the Indian economy. And as a part of that, let me also mention that when India becomes one common market, the facility of input tax credit will be available across the country. So therefore it will reduce production costs. It will therefore make Indian manufacturing much more competitive.
Mr. Das, what kind of tax buoyancy do you expect? I mean, enough has been said in the parliament about it improving the efficiency and the compliance and really getting more and more people in the tax bracket as far as small businesses are concerned, the unorganized sector. But what kind of buoyancy do you expect, and how much of the unorganized sector do you realistically believe can be brought into the GST fold?
You see, there will be first a threshold level below which the GST, under GST they would perhaps get a facility to pay a kind of a lump sum tax amount. But this is a matter which the GST Council will decide, and this is a matter which has to be worked out as a part of the GST legislation. But so far as unorganized sector is concerned, naturally the very small players, I mean, who are running petty shops or small vegetable shops, they are the end sellers. So therefore, there the impact will not be much. But let me also mention that in GST, if you are a part of the value chain, and value chain includes not only the manufacturing value chain, it also includes the business, the trading value chain. If you are a part of the value chain, unless you pay GST, you don't get the benefit of the input tax credit. So therefore, your cost and your selling price, your sale price will be higher, and naturally you become uncompetitive in the market. So to be competitive in the market, to succeed and to survive in a GST regime, everybody has to come into the tax net, and that will bring lot of buoyancy into the tax collections.
Shaktikanta Das, Economic Affairs Secretary, speaking exclusively to ET. Now, I would urge you to stay with us, Mr. Das, because we've got a very special view from corporate India as well. Joining us on the phone line is Mr. Uday Kotak, Vice Chairman of Kotak Mahindra Bank and one of the tallest leaders of corporate India. Mr. Uday Kotak, thank you so much for speaking to ET now. I know it's late in the evening, but this is a big, historic day, one will have to say, as the Parliament has come together and we've finally seen some sort of political consensus on this crucial legislation that you've yourself been speaking about for years now.
Yes. No, I think this is a very proud moment for all Indians. I compliment the Parliament, the Government of India, both the entire ministry and ministers, and of course, all the bureaucrats who worked very hard as a part of the government team for this historic day for India. I think India is in a very good shape. We've had wonderful monsoons. We have now seen the GST pass, and this increases the confidence in the Indian state's ability to build a great future for its people.
Mr. Kotak, what do you make of the final draft that has been cleared by the Parliament this evening? There's been a bit of give and take. The government has dropped that contentious 1% additional levy, which many believe would have had cascading impact. On the other hand, we've seen that they have not actually capped the GST rate in the Constitution itself. What do you make of the compromise that's been reached between the government and the opposition? Would you say this is the closest that we could get to a perfect GST?
You know, finally, there is always a give and take. Before I comment on that, I would like to see the fine print before I give my views on that. But I think this little bit of give and take to achieve what is important is a part of the game. That's the politics. And I'm sure that the government would have taken care that it is something which fundamentally still protects the whole substance of what the GST is supposed to do.
Mr. Kotak, because you're in a mood to talk candidly, I must ask you a question. This is Supriya Srinath from the New Delhi studios. The question really is that towards the end, the government and the opposition got talking about the GST rate. I know it's not a part of the constitution, but it will certainly be a part of the GST bill as is being assured in the House. 18% is what is being talked about. Corporate India would want a rate somewhere there. The state finance ministers would want a higher rate. What rate do you think is going to be viable for businesses? Because Constitutional Amendment Bill has made GST the reality, but matters move on and the next goalpost is going to be that rate. Mr. Kotak?
No, I don't want to at this stage speculate. I mean, if you got Mr. Das on the line, he may be in a better position to give an answer on that. In terms of what the final rate is.
I'm going to him next, but I must first exhaust. I am going to go to him indeed, but I must exhaust my questions to you. How do you think GST is going to change life for corporate India? How is this going to change life for Indian industry? How businesses have been done so far?
I think, first of all, I think it's the whole concept and then, of course, the execution. On the concept, to say that there is a single tax and all other tax get inputted against that will simplify the whole collection process and save a lot of leakages which may be happening in the current system. And one has to also examine, of course, in detail, there will be some people who will benefit and some who will lose, but in totality, I think the leakages which were the big drain on the system will get saved, and ultimately it improves the government's revenues and the fiscal situation, which is a big plus.
Mr. Kotak, how big an overhang was this in the first place? In your conversation with foreign investors and large CEOs, who are big ticket FDI investors as well, how big an overhang was this, and what does this do in terms of India's positioning in an otherwise relatively weak global environment? Do you think the way the world looks at India could potentially change on account of some sort of political consensus coming through? Was this the big overhang that's now out of the way?
In fact, I was in London and Hong Kong and Singapore about a week ago and talking to institutional investors. The feedback everyone was asking, will GST be a reality? And of course, the importance of the bill is not to be underestimated. The investors are also looking at a signal whether the government could make this bill a reality as a symbol that it is on the move. And this is a very important signal to the world.
Mr. Kotak, the other issue, of course, I know you don't want to speculate on rates, and we are going to quiz Mr. Das on that as well. But the other issue that I wanted to hear from you is how soon should we get this rolling? I mean, is it critical that we roll it out by April 1, 2017? Is that deadline feasible? Do you think corporate India would urge the government to move ahead? Because much needs to be done between now and April 1, 2017. We need to get the infrastructure in place. We also need to get states to pass this bill. The GST law needs to be cleared. So a lot of work needs to happen at the political level and at the administrative level. How confident are you that it will get done by April 1, 2017? And how critical is it that we meet this deadline?
You know, I think we got to keep in mind that there will always, whenever we are executing something of this scale, there will always be challenges on execution on all the way. And therefore, the faster it gets done, and hopefully April 1, 2017 is important, because you don't want these issues to come closer to when the 2019 elections come. And therefore, 2017 April is important so that people can settle down to the new world and it doesn't get too close to political noise which happens closer to 2019.
Mr. Kotak, how prepared is India Inc. to embrace the GST? We've had tax experts who've said that there is a panic of sorts in certain sections of Indian industry because people didn't really see this coming, and now that it's a reality, there seems to be a panic in Indian industry. How prepared is India Inc. to embrace the GST really? Because it really requires a lot of things to be done before GST can actually be embraced.
I think my view is that, I mean, once it's a reality and it's a bill and the final format and other details come out in terms of what this roadmap means, India Inc., there is no choice. It has to shape up or face the music. But I think there's a whole...
Fair point indeed, but you're somebody who also understands...
technology issues, which will be the challenge.
You're also somebody... You're also somebody who understands the macros so well, and I must then ask you the question. A lot of people out there believe that to begin with, GST will be inflationary in nature. Does that essentially squeeze the elbow room that people were waiting for interest rates to come down?
See, I think, and again, a lot depends on policy. My sense is if it is transitory, the monetary policy will look through. If it is, therefore, any such change will have transitory impact. I don't think we should mix it with sustainable situation. And frankly, with the good monsoons, I think, and hopefully oil prices remaining soft and food having a good production run, I think inflation independently should be in a reasonable shape. Of course, subject to the payment under the new pay commission and the issues around that. But broadly, I think inflation seems to be in a reasonable control.
Mr. Uday Kotak, really appreciate you taking the time and speaking to us on what really is a historic day. Appreciate you joining us on ET Now with your thoughts and perspective. That's a big view from corporate India. Uday Kotak speaking exclusively to ET Now. Let's also tell our viewers that in moments from now, we will be joined by some of the stalwarts of corporate India. R. Seshasai, Chairman of Infosys. We will also be having with us D. Shiv Kumar, Chairman of Pepsi India. We've also got Banmali Agarwala, the head of GE in India. R.C. Bhargav, Chairman of Maruti Suzuki. All of them with their perspective. This is a big day. We're going live with this story till midnight. We've been with the GST debate since 2 this afternoon. Also Rajiv Lal, we've got Vijay Shekhar Sharma, Harsh Mariwala and Deep Kalra. So it doesn't get bigger than this. We've got a really powerful lineup going all evening on ET Now. But I want to bring the focus back to the man of the moment. One will have to say, I guess the man of the moment is Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, but one of his key aides and one of the key top officials in the Finance Ministry, Shaktikanta Das, with us, joining us from North Block. Mr. Das, appreciate you being with us on ET Now again. Now, let's talk about the impact of the GST on the broader economy, because we've heard theories from various economists and corporates as well, saying that it'll add about 1.5%, maybe even 2% to our GDP. I don't know if there's any mathematical basis to this argument, if there's any sound economic logic to this argument, but that's the general feeling that one gets. That's the assumption that much of corporate India is making. But tell us, with petrol, alcohol and electricity left out, do you think it's important that expectations need to be tempered as well? The GST is no magic wand that's going to overnight change the growth outlook of this economy?
Electricity, in any case, right from the beginning was never a part of the GST structure the way it was worked out by the empowered committee right from day one. Now with regard to petrol, diesel, let me mention that this is a part of GST as per the Constitution Amendment. The tax on petrol and diesel will be levied from a date to be decided by the GST Council. So I would expect, given the kind of buoyancy and the economic activity that GST is likely to generate, I think it's just a matter of time before petrol and diesel and other petroleum products come into the GST network, become a part of the GST. As regards industrial alcohol, it is a part of GST. As regards alcohol for human consumption, the states had some issues, so therefore it's been decided, it was agreed, and it's been decided to keep it outside GST.
All right, now given how India's fiscal federal structure will change, what will now be the role of the Finance Commission, Mr. Das? Because I'm curious to find out, does this become redundant at some stage?
No, the Finance Commission will continue to be very relevant. That constitutional provision remains. The Finance Commission will be constituted every 5 years. It will give recommendations with regard to devolution of central taxes. In the context of GST, what it would mean is that, you see, GST has two parts. One is the central GST, the other one is the state GST. Now, central GST will come to the central kitty. So, Finance Commission will look at the tax revenue of the center coming from the central GST and obviously from the income tax and other taxes which the center collects, and the Finance Commission will give its recommendation for devolution of this component of taxation, that is income tax as well as the central GST.
Right, Mr. Das, I'm sure our viewers would want to know what's going to happen from here on. That's critical, and who better than you to answer that question? Tell us, what will happen from now before GST becomes a law, from state ratification to CGST and SGST? Help us understand the process that's going to kick in from here on.
You see, the Revenue Department, which is a part of Finance Ministry, and the state finance departments and taxation departments of various states, they have been working together under the aegis of the Empowered Committee of State Finance Ministers. Sequentially, if you look at it, after the GST is, now that it is passed in the Parliament, it has to be ratified by 50% of the state legislatures. Thereafter, it gets notified with presidential assent, it gets notified and it becomes a part of the Indian Constitution. Then parallel, once that happens, the GST Council will be formally notified. Now, parallelly, the drafting of the GST legislation is going on. So, once the Constitution Amendment is notified, then the GST legislation will be finalized by the GST Council and the Centre will pass the central GST legislation, the states will pass the state GST law, Centre also will be required to pass the IGST, that is the interstate component of the GST. So, these are the three tax laws which have to be passed in the Parliament as well as the respective state legislatures. Once that happens, the rules under the Act also will be notified. Now, let me mention that a lot of work is going on in the government, in the Finance Ministry and in the state finance departments to keep everything in ready. Although the activities will happen sequentially, but a lot of advance action and a lot of parallel action is taking place.
I'm glad you're referring to this parallel action, sir. I just want to understand, it's the administrative changes that will have to swing in very fast for this GST to be executed. How prepared are we there, and also the IT infrastructure, because this is going to be so tech intensive. What is the level of preparedness as far as the IT backbone for the GST is concerned?
This is the Revenue Department, as I mentioned. The Revenue Department of the Finance Ministry is working very closely with the state finance departments. The GST network, which is again a SPV which has been set up, already they are working on creating an IT backbone for GST in coordination with the various states. And as you will see, in the weeks and days to come, the Revenue Department will be spelling out the details.
Right, Mr. Das, this is a slightly technical question, but it's an important one nevertheless, because let's talk about the other fallout of the GST. Well, cost of manufactured products, or goods as we call it, will come down, assuming that the GST rate is about 18%. Cost of services will go up significantly. So in some ways, it's both progressive and regressive, and this is under the assumption that it's the rich who consume more services and the poor who consume more goods. So how is this going to play out broadly on the consumer per se and across various sections of society? How do you see this balancing out?
So let me put it this way, I mean, you cannot really call it regressive because GST provides the facility of input tax credit across the whole country, treating India as one common market. There will be no tax on tax as a part of GST. So therefore, overall, it would not be correct to say that certain components of GST will be regressive. This will be a far more transparent and compliable tax for everybody.
Mr. Shaktikanta Das, one of the key architects of the GST in your earlier avatar and somebody who will see this roll out even as the DEA Secretary. Thank you very, very much for taking time out and joining us this evening right here on India Tonight. This really is a game-changing reform and we are covering it in a way like you've never seen Indian television cover any reform before. But let's take this across to our debate number 1 and we're joined by a very power-packed panel. I'm indeed going to begin with R. Seshasai. Thank you very much for being with us this evening, sir. How significant do you believe the GST is for the Indian economy? People have called it the mother of all economic reforms. Would you see this as a historic breakthrough or do you think the euphoria needs to be tempered a little bit at this stage?
Well, obviously, everyone feels very relieved that we have seen now almost the end of the tunnel. But I don't know whether we should celebrate the final triumph of national interest over competitive politics, or we should truly introspect about the fact that we have taken nearly a decade to move through a reform which is seen to be a very necessary and a very beneficial one for the entire country. If this has taken this long, we should really introspect as to what we need to be doing in the future in order to accelerate the pace of various reforms that we do. I think this is something which we should really be worried about.
Couldn't agree more with you there, Mr. Seshasai, striking that note of caution, even as there's enough reason to celebrate what's a momentous day indeed. But the fact is that it's taken us so long, 10 painful years, to get this through. How do we accelerate the pace as far as the legislative agenda is concerned? D. Shiv Kumar, Chairman of PepsiCo, good to have you on this debate on ET now as well. Tell us, what's your view, your first reactions to what really is a red letter day as far as the economic history of India is concerned? It's being touted as a mother of all reforms. You think this excitement, this euphoria is warranted, or do you think it's a bit misplaced? What's your view?
I would say it's an extremely significant measure. You are right that GST and the first steps towards GST started under the Prime Ministership of Vajpayee, and that was in the year 2000 when he appointed Ashim Das Gupta as the head of the committee towards a progressive GST. It's taken 16 years in the making, but I'm glad that we have one form and shape of GST which I think will benefit the industry dramatically. Most experts believe that this will add at least 1 or 2% to our growth rate, which is the GDP growth rate. I can see a number of benefits accruing to a number of sectors. I think on the manufacturing side and on the FMCG side and retail side, you'll see clear benefits. On the services side, as the effective rate moves up by 2 to 3 percentage points, in the early days one could feel that services is a little more expensive, but I think over a period of time, I think that will also resolve itself. But I think an absolutely historic thing, because for once we have a unified tax structure across all the 29 states, and with one tax rate, I think we'll be far better off for each category.
Game-changing reform indeed. Let's get in another MNC view as well, and it's our pleasure to have Banmali Agrawala, the South Asia CEO of GE, joining us on this interview. Doesn't speak very often, so great to have you with us as well, Mr. Agrawala. Tell us, how are you viewing GST? You've got you've got an exposure across various sectors of the economy. How disruptive is this going to be for the Indian economy? How significant a move is this? It's being touted as the mother of all reforms. Would you agree with that sort of euphoric assessment?
Well, I do believe that this is indeed a momentous occasion in our history, and for a number of reasons. First, I mean, it is a bill that clearly unites the country, makes India a single market, which I think is very important. Otherwise, India just comes across as a very fragmented market particularly to investors from the outside. So I think in that sense it is extremely significant. The other is, I mean, if you just look at tax reform and the entire indirect taxes, we know that causes so much of pain, all the issues around logistics, movements and all of that. So all of that gets addressed as well in the bill. But most significantly, I think it signals the ability of the government to work with the opposition parties, with the other states, to take head-on some of the very ticklish issues that we have facing our economy. So I think on all fronts, this is indeed a very momentous bill.
Oh, it signals that and a lot more as far as this game-changing reform is concerned. But Mr. Bhargav, the senior statesman of Indian industry, how significant do you think GST is for businesses in India? This really is a red letter day, like people are calling it, as far as our own economy is concerned.
I'm not sure if I would go so far as to say it is the mother of all reforms, but certainly the GST is a very major tax reform, and I think all economists all over the world have understood and endorsed the benefit of a GST. I really haven't come across anybody who, as a tax system, says that the GST is not a good tax system or is not going to benefit an economy in a substantive manner.
Let's really look at the broader picture right now. And Mr. Seshasai, this question is really coming your way. Does the passage of the GST and the way especially it has been done with broad consensus, 197 votes, 197 in favor of the GST, does this signal the end of the political acrimony, the end of the legislative logjam that has stalled key reforms like the GST? And does this also tell a thing or two about how the government and the opposition can actually work together to push the economic agenda?
Well, I think there is certainly some hope that people can come together in the interest of the country. But we need to do a lot more in terms of setting up institutions, mechanisms. We need to find ways by which civil society, the organs of democracy outside the government can also influence the pace of reforms, the pace of doing things which are in the interest of the country, not merely at a national level, but at a state level, at the city level. We have to find many answers to the question of how to increase the pace of administrative reform.
Sure. D. Shivkumar, before we get down to the specifics of the impact of the GST on sectors and on the consumer, I want to talk about the broader signal that this evening is really sending out to the global community. There were concerns on the slow pace of reforms. Just last week, we had the IMF come out with a note indicating that they believe that the pace of reforms in India is slow and disappointing. Does this GST in one stroke negate that criticism, or do you expect do you expect more investor interest in India? Because we were speaking to Uday Kotak as well, and he was indicating as well that for foreign investors, this was the key overhang that's now out of the way.
I wouldn't go down that path to say whether the government reforms are in line, etc. All I can say, which is where I started, I think the GST is an absolute crossroad decision for this country. It's a fantastic thing that we are doing, which unites the whole market, gives us one economic unit to work with. And I think it's taken 16 years, but I think it's the absolute right thing. Again, it might not be in exactly the shape that each industry leader or each industry wants, but it's in a shape which I believe will benefit the country.
Fair point indeed, but Mr. Banmali Agrawal, if I may throw the same question to you, there were voices of concern on the slow pace of reforms. Many people thought the government wasn't really putting its political capital to use. Do you believe the GST in one stroke blunts all that criticism?
Well, I certainly think it's a very bold move. And, you know, I frankly am in the camp again that I think the government has taken a number of steps within the, how should I say, the framework that they have, within the limitations that they have to get things moving in a number of sectors already, be it rail, be it oil and gas exploration, be it aviation, be it healthcare, be it renewables. You know, I think there are a number of examples that I can cite where we as a company are certainly benefiting. This, I think, signals a political maturity in terms of how do you rally the country around and different stakeholders around some very ticklish issues that we face as a country. And as you're well aware, Supriya, there are so many of these issues that we need to tackle, right from land reform to electricity tariffs to so many labor reform. And I think if a similar approach whereby we can build consensus, we can find common ground and figure out a way of moving ahead, I think bodes extremely well for a democracy like ours.
Okay, that's the broader picture now. Let's talk about the upside of GST at a broader economy level. Mr. Seshasai, I want to toss this to you. Let's talk about the upside of GST. Many of your peers in the industry have been saying for weeks and months and years now that we could see our economy grow by up to 1.5% to 2%. Is that an exaggerated claim, would you say?
I really haven't been able to figure out why this would automatically improve the GDP by 1.5–2%. I haven't seen very well researched and argued paper about how this number has been arrived at. But let us say two things. One is that clearly this is going to mean a major step forward in terms of ease of doing business. And to the extent that we eliminate the inefficient costs that we incur as a result of very, very complex compliance processes for multiple taxation. To that extent, certainly this would boost the economic growth, but I don't know whether that is going to add up to 1.5%. And the second, of course, is the fact that there will be much larger compliance because we are talking about all links in the chain getting on to account books. And therefore, to that extent that there is greater degree of compliance, no link can be left aside. Certainly that is very helpful. But I also must say that we are just beginning this journey on this GST. To think that we have arrived at our destination would be fallacious.
All right, would urge all the CEOs to stay with us because we've got another important political voice joining us on the phone line. Derek O'Brien from the Trinamool Congress, who spoke very eloquently as well on the GST debate just a short while ago in the Parliament, joins us on the phone line for a quick reaction on this. Derek, I know that Trinamool Congress has been supporting the GST for the longest time. Happy to see it get passed unanimously in the Rajya Sabha today?
Extremely happy, but this is only the first innings over. I hope the Congress and BJP are both so as responsible in the winter session, because this is the first innings. We need to get it going in the winter session as well, so this can be implemented in April 1. It's one thing having an idea and passing a bill. We've debated, we've deliberated, and we've legislated, but implementation is important. So November is very, very important because today was good. It was consensus all across. And I'm glad the non-Congress, non-BJP parties played a very, very important role, including my party, the Trinamool Congress, and everybody else in the middle benches. So very, very good. But this match is not over. We need to keep pushing so we can get GST implemented on April 1. So I hope the Congress doesn't make any fuss in the future, nor does the BJP. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you very much there. All right. Thank you very much, Derek O'Brien, for talking to us. But Sandeep, you want to take it forward with Mr. Seshasai? You were having a conversation with him. I don't want to interrupt.
That's right. I wish you could have asked a few more questions to Derek, but I can imagine he was rushed. It was a heated debate. Supriya went on for what? Well over 6 hours. We thought it would be a 4.5 hour debate. Well over 6 hours. And he was one of the speakers as well. He represented the Trinamool Congress. But Mr. Seshasai, you spoke about that upside. Help us understand, how much time will it really take, you think, for the upside, whatever it is, to kick in? Do you think it will be visible almost immediately for Indian industry, for you and me, for normal people? Or is it going to take time for the upside to really be visible?
Can I move away from this question to look at a couple of very impactful results coming as a result of GST and then come back to this question? To my mind, this is going to mean a phenomenal database that will get created, which could be shared between the central government and the state governments, which must also be accessible to the industry. And the phenomenal benefit that you will get by mining this data is, I think, not clearly understood. We are not planning to make use of this. That's very important. Infosys has been involved in developing the technology backbone for GST. And I'm getting excited by the amount of data that is going to be available to identify where value gets created, where value is not getting created, how do we look at incentivizing value creation, how do we eliminate the inefficiencies from the system. All of that must be used to good purpose both by the governments and by the industry. And I think therefore to come back to this question saying when will this benefit accrue, and that is not from the getting the immediate benefit out of a transaction by moving goods from one state to the other without having to stay in a depot. Those are the small change. The big benefit will come out of this phenomenal database that we are creating, and what we do to extract information out of it. How do we use this information for better management of government and by the industry? That needs a great deal of work to be done. That's number one. The second also is that I think this is a very seminal step that we have taken from the point of view of looking at the federal system being looked at as one market, unifying this as one market. And in that process, we are going to be also be looking at how do we make sure that development takes place uniformly or evenly or equally, if not equitably, across all parts of the country. Now, the tax reform that we are doing now, GST is just one part of that. The larger question is, how do we take this forward by other steps by which we can then accelerate development in those laggard states? How do we make sure that those which are leading are becoming even more competitive? And therefore, what are the next steps that we will have to take from the point of view of macro management of the Indian economy and its development? I think that is going to have a much greater benefit to industry eventually, and that's again something that we have really not thought through. And I think these are the larger benefits that we must focus on.
That's a fair point. You've articulated the impact and some aspects that really haven't been touched upon by a lot of corporate leaders there, Mr. Seshasai, bringing in that perspective really. But Mr. Shiv Kumar, let's talk about your business really, because you are in a consumer-facing business. Tell us, how do you see GST impacting your business in the near and the medium term?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is, today if you look at the country, if you were to, we operate in India, but at a sub level we operate in a state. We need 29 warehouses virtually to operate in every single state. If you don't have a warehouse in a state, you pay a tax for getting goods from some other state. That's the first thing. Now, you don't need 29 warehouses. You could actually build in India into circles where the radius of each circle is about 200-250 kilometers. So, in that sense, you might need 8 to 10 depots across the country or large warehouses. Current size of warehouses could be 50,000 square feet. I think future warehouses for all businesses will be 500,000 or more, and that will build scale across the full value chain. You'll get scale manufacturing, you'll get scale transportation, you'll get scale warehousing, and you'll get scale distributors. And I think that whole chain will work to take out the inefficiencies of inventory and the inefficiencies of small lots in every single category. I think India will truly benefit in the scale sense with GST. Most businesses will start thinking scale. Now it is truly one unified market as opposed to 29 sub-markets.
All right, now that you've spoken so much about manufacturing and so much has written and said about how it's going to aid manufacturing, let's ask the man. Banmali Agrawala, how does the GST boost GE's own plans of local manufacturing here in India?
Well, I think not just this reform in itself, but I think it's the overall climate that India presently offers to the business community from the outside, and particularly to GE. So we've been seeing a number of such steps being taken by the government. This, of course, is a massive, it's a bold one. So I think it gives us the belief, the confidence to continue to look at India with a further degree of optimism, to take even more risk, to make even more investments. So I'd say that it further enhances the climate in which we would indeed like to make even more investments in this country.
All right, Mr. Bhargav, let's bring this to you then. How exactly is GST going to impact players like yourselves, the auto industry at large, or the industry at large actually? How does this really change the dynamics of your business? A lot is going to change from vendors to consumers to contracts that have been done. But how exactly does this really change the landscape and the way you've done business in India so far?
See, the absence of a GST and the presence of today's taxation system where there are interstate sales tax, where there is a central sales tax, where there are entry taxes in some states, there are need for various permits to enter some states because of sales tax compliance laws, makes the planning of movement of products and goods extremely complicated. And when we look at our logistics of distribution of products or buying product from somewhere, we don't look at what is the optimum solution for doing what we have to do in terms of products and customer benefits. We look at its impact on taxation, which tax will get attracted, how to reduce the impact of those taxes and to avoid double taxation. And the solutions, therefore, which we evolve for our business are much less than optimal. They are only optimized towards the tax purpose. Now, if GST is implemented, I think one major hurdle in optimizing business goes away. Logistics will become so much simpler. I think no question that any company which has a substantive logistical requirement for its business will benefit greatly by GST.
You know, Mr. Agarwala, all our CEOs in the panel spoke about how it's going to bring in more efficiency to corporate India. Mr. D. Shivkumar articulated it, how instead of having 29 sub-markets, we're going to have one market. Surely all that efficiency is going to have some upside to the business as well. And I want to talk about the big concern nationally that we are talking about today, which is job creation. We're seeing this phase of jobless growth that just seems to be persistent for a while now. And it's a big concern politically as well, the fact that we're not creating enough jobs. The fact that GST will make businesses more productive, in turn, will that have any sort of an impact on job creation? Will people want to expand more, create more jobs? How do you see that playing out?
Well, absolutely do, because I think one of the things about job creation, and particularly in the context of India, is that we firmly believe, and I firmly believe, that exports has got to be a major piece in our entire drive towards Make in India and thereby creating more jobs. When we talk about exports, it's all about being globally competitive. This reform, this bill makes us more productive, more competitive, and I think more efficient. So anything that makes us more efficient on a global basis will certainly kind of result in creating more jobs. So short answer to your question, most certainly it will, I think, result in creation of more jobs.
Mr. Seshasai, we were chatting with Pawan Goenka of M&M just the other day, and he made a point about how this is going to lead to, companies and corporations making investment decisions purely on the base of business fundamentals and not necessarily on the base of tax considerations, interstate taxes and all that will become irrelevant. So would you agree with that assessment that investment calls by corporations will be largely driven by business fundamentals, which is how it should be?
No, there are two things. One is that various states have been giving different tax incentives for attracting investment. So I think it's a good thing that perhaps there will be some sunset to this entire issue, and hopefully that other things such as infrastructure, skill availability will become much more important than sales tax benefits from state governments and so on. So that's one part of that. But having said that, I think it's also important that, as I said earlier, we have a framework for understanding how are we going to make sure that spatially the development is uniformly spread. Therefore, what will be the kind of interventions that state governments will have to make in order to make that happen? How will the central government ensure that the laggard states come up over a period of time? Those will have influences in terms of manufacturing decisions, in terms of where you locate, how do you distribute and so on. These are much more important questions.
All right, Mr. Banmali Agrawal, I'm just going to come to you on that because the consumer is a very important pie of this entire GST, and it looks like the benefits there are a tad exaggerated because I mean, yes, consumer manufactured product cost will come down, but services are likely to go up. So there is going to be a balancing act, but are the benefits there a little exaggerated for the consumer at large?
The state government is on board in order to implement one of the most important taxation reforms in India itself. The fact that it has been passed and passed unanimously, all regional parties and national parties have actively supported it. The proceedings have culminated to demonstrate to the world that this is a great day both for Indian democracy and Indian federalism. In fact, Indian democracy and Indian federalism are at their very best, in as much as all national political parties and regional parties, all state governments have come together to usher a major taxation reform. On behalf of the government, I express my deep sense of gratitude to all the political parties which have actively participated in this discussion and supported this reform. The government's approach also was to build a larger consensus, which we succeeded in doing. We now propose to take some of the additions and amendments which have been made to the bill as approved by the Lok Sabha back to the Lok Sabha very soon, subject to the directions of the Speaker, so that the Lok Sabha also can approve the bill and then it can go to the states for ratification. Once the GST is implemented, it will bring basic changes as far as the Indian tax structure is concerned. It will convert India into one unified market with one unified tax in the country. It will improve the base of taxation. It will make evasion extremely difficult. And I think the center and the state governments in future will have to work together in order to make this a great success. Overall, I think it was an excellent debate in which almost every member has contributed to it. And as I just stated earlier, this is Indian democracy and federalism both at their very best. आज ये महत्वपूर्ण अवसर है इस देश के लिए कि एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण टैक्सेशन रिफॉर्म कर व्यवस्था में सुधार संसद ने पारित किया है। महत्व का विषय ये है कि ये सुधार सर्वसम्मति से पास हुआ है। लगभग हर राजनीतिक दल ने इसका समर्थन किया है। राज्य सरकारों के बीच में भी एक आम राय थी और उन्होंने भी इसका समर्थन किया और इसलिए इस देश का लोकतंत्र और इस देश का संघीय ढांचा, उसकी जो ताकत और शक्ति है वो पूरे विश्व के सामने आज स्पष्ट रूप से प्रकट होती है कि देश हित में सभी राजनीतिक दल, सभी राज्य सरकारें एक आवाज में आम राय बन जाए तो एक दिशा में जा सकती हैं। मैं सभी राजनीतिक दलों का और राज्य सरकारों का बहुत आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि इस महत्वपूर्ण कानून का उन्होंने समर्थन किया है। इसको अब हम लोग लोकसभा में लेकर जाएंगे और स्पीकर साहिबा से डायरेक्शन लेकर जितनी शीघ्र ये आ पाएगा उतनी शीघ्र इसको लागू करने का प्रयास करेंगे।
And the realistic implementation date, according to you? So do you think April 2017 is achievable?
There is still a long road to be covered. It has to be approved by the Lok Sabha, the changes. Then it has to be ratified by the state assemblies. Then the GST Council has to be constituted. The GST Council then would in turn be preparing the draft, which under the present constitutional amendment will go before the Parliament and also the state assemblies in respective cases. They will then settle the rate of taxes. There are some procedural issues which are to be sorted out. And I think what is well begun is substantially done. I would like to do it as soon as possible.
Hello, it's done. Hello.
That is indeed Finance Minister Arun Jaitley speaking after that momentous legislation. It's going to be a big legislation that he's going to be finally signing off as India's Finance Minister, and that's the goods and the services tax. But Mr. Banmali Agrawal, I was asking you the question on consumers because they're really the last end of the spectrum, so to say. How exactly will the GST impact the Indian consumer? Like I said, cost of manufactured products will come down essentially, but services could well be a lot costlier. How does the bargain balance out for the consumer really?
Well, I think this is something that we'll have to actually see play out, because if you look at the entire gamut of, how will the whole indirect taxes scene play out, there'll be some goods where I think from a consumer perspective, the cost will actually go down. Some services maybe where it actually goes up. We'll have to see the piling up effect of all the indirect taxes where the end commodities such as electricity, such as oil, etc., where it will pile up and there is no end relief. So we'll have to see how this plays out, but the feel is that by and large it will do more good than do any harm at all. And remember that there is a massive opportunity to improve productivity and save costs, to also, how should I say, neutralize some of the downside effect of the piling up of taxes.
Mr. Agarwala, D. Shiv Kumar, Mr. Seshas, I would urge you to stay with us because I want to take it across to another special guest joining us live on India Tonight this evening, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Rajya Sabha MP and someone who's been backing this reform for a really long time. Rajiv, great to have you yesterday and great to have you today right after that historic debate. You've been a part of this process for years now. You've been publicly advocating for this, irrespective of which government was in power. Surely you must be a happy man that we finally arrived at some sort of a political consensus on this landmark reform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think today is a big day. It's a historical day. It was alluded to by many members of parliament who spoke today, including myself, that we knew history was being made. So it was an epic day, and it was made sweeter by the fact that what got done in parliament was unanimous. There was hardly any opposition to the bill that was presented as amended by the government. So all around a good day at work.
Yeah.
A good day at work indeed, but Rajiv Chandrasekhar, a quick word on what next, because this is just the process has just begun. One will have to say, even as we celebrate what is done today, there's much more that needs to be done from here on. We need the GST law to come back to the Rajya Sabha. How do you see the process panning out from here on, and how much time do you think it will take before goods and services tax finally becomes a reality?
No, I think as the finance minister alluded in his reply today, there is a lot of work to be done in terms of the actual tax rates, the slabs. There is that whole issue of discovering the numbers, what gets taxed at what slab, and then there is the whole issue of the actual execution of it, the IT platforms, getting the states on board, getting both those laws passed in the winter session, the IGST and the CGST bills passed. By the way, this constitutional amendment also needs to be ratified by the state assemblies. So there is a lot of stuff that is focused on both legislatively being achieved as well as on the ground, the infrastructure and the logistics to actually roll out the taxation platforms.
Rajiv, a quick question about the last part of the debate in Parliament, and it really got down to whether it should come as a money bill when the law finally comes in or as a finance bill. As a member of the August House, I'm presuming you would want to commit as a finance bill as well. Are you disappointed that the finance minister did not make that commitment?
No, I don't think so. I think what he said is exactly what the correct position is. He said, I will do what is constitutionally right. I will not duck a debate. I will discuss it with all the parties. And look, I think it's quite clear to the government now that building consensus around big ticket reforms, big deal reforms is a good thing to do, and it is paying off for them. So I don't think there will be any attempt to duck a debate or to bypass parliament. And I think that is a little bit of a paranoia on part of some of the opposition members. And I think the finance minister responded as he should, which is that we still don't have the contours of the GST law in front of us. It's very difficult to now start giving assurances on something we don't have. But I will do things by the constitution, and I will not duck a debate and discussion with all parties.
I have a quick question on rates, and you alluded to this earlier in your answer, and I know that was not really the subject matter of discussion today, but that is going to be the next goalpost, the next focus area that everybody is going to talk about, and the council will take a call there. 18% has been hotly debated. It's out there in the public domain. I'm sure states would want a higher rate, and I'm sure industry would want a lower rate, and as a consumer, I would want it even lower. But what is a viable GST revenue neutral rate according to you?
No, Supriya, I think you're making a mistake believing that the states want a higher rate. I don't think anybody wants a higher rate. As a matter of fact, you know that the empowered group of finance ministers said, and they passed a resolution to the effect that the rates would moderate, they would come down. It must be consumer friendly. Everybody today around the table who's a decision maker is a political person. He's a political representative, whether he's a finance minister or MP or a finance minister of the government of India. So I don't think there is anybody with a reason to make this tax higher. More so when the government of India is specifically telling the states that they will make it revenue neutral for them and backstop any revenue loss for the next 5 years. So inherently the system is not incentivized to make these taxes higher. And that is borne out by the fact that the empowered group of finance ministers have passed a resolution saying they want the numbers to be moderating and consumer friendly. So I expect the taxes to be low. It will obviously not be low from day one. It will become progressively lower as the tax base expands and as the GST kicks in and expands its coverage. But it will not be a high tax. I do not believe that.
All right, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, really appreciate you joining us for that quick chat live from New Delhi. It's been a busy day for you. Thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on ET Now. This evening, we've got another really special guest joining us on the phone line live from Mumbai, Ms. Chanda Kochar, MD and CEO of ICICI Bank and one of India's most highly regarded CEOs. Ms. Kochar, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us for this quick chat on ET Now this evening. I know it's late in the evening. Apologies for bothering you, but this is a historic day indeed as we finally arrive at political consensus on the much-awaited goods and services tax. We've been speaking to a whole host of CEOs. We had Uday Kotak, we had Mr. R. Seshasai as well, Banmali Agarwala. All of them believe that this is a significant, a watershed moment, so to say. Would you agree with that view, or do you think the euphoria is a bit misplaced because much needs to happen from here on before goods and services tax actually becomes a reality?
Well, I entirely agree that this is a watershed moment. I think this is the most important reform in the indirect taxation in India ever. So it indeed is a watershed moment.
Do you expect more tax buoyancy, ma'am? And do you also expect the unorganized sector that was not a part of real taxation to now come into the tax fold? How do you see this change that landscape?
I think this will bring about kind of a structural change in the entire taxation structure. I think first of all, what it signals is that there is resolve on part of the government to put in place a significant structural change, a change that will benefit all segments of the economy. And as you are saying, this will definitely broaden the tax base across the whole segment. But it will bring about a huge amount of simplification. It will bring about a huge amount of ease of tax collection. And I think all these are efficiencies which in the medium term then benefit the consumers on the whole.
Ms. Kochar, if you look at the global experience, one gets the feeling that whenever GST is introduced, in the near term, there is an impact on inflation. We do see a spike in inflation in the near term, which of course moderates over a period of time. Do you see that happening here as well? And what kind of an impact could that have on the rate cycle? Because corporate India is eagerly awaiting a turn, a sharper turn in the rate cycle.
I think, first of all, these rates have yet to be defined. But I think what we should look at is really the medium term and the long term benefit. And in the medium term and the long term, this will definitely just lead to more efficiencies and therefore, the overall softening impact on the system as a whole. So I think we should really more focus on the medium term and the long term benefits of this.
Considering we are talking about the medium term and the long term benefits of this, ma'am, a lot of people out there believe that this also signifies that the opposition and the government can actually set aside political differences and come together when reforms like this is concerned. Is that a message? Is that a signal that you're going to derive out of this? Or are we reading too much into this legislation and its passage today?
No, I think, one important signal from all this is really that, you can expect big structural reforms in India to happen even when it is matters where, all parties have to discuss and debate. And I think if you look at the debate that happened, it was such a participative debate, and it's after such a participative debate, such a important structural change has been made. So, it signals the government's resolve, it signals the country's ability to actually bring structural reforms and changes in place which matter.
Ms. Kotak, I'm not going to hold you up for too long. Just two more questions. One is on how will foreign investors read this? Because this was seen as a key overhang in all our conversations with foreign investors. And I'm sure in your conversations as well, this is an issue that must have been brought up time and again. Now that it's out of the way, how do you see foreign investors reading this move? Number one. Number two, by when do we see the upside of GST being visible for everyone, for corporate India, for consumers, for everyone? How much time do you think it will take for the upside really to be visible?
I think as far as the foreign investors are concerned, this is in a way a big milestone because they have all been watching this, not just from the point of view of GST being passed, but also from the point of view of getting the signal of, how fast can Indian democracy and the parliamentary system move to put in place such big structural reforms. So I think it's a big thumbs up to the ability of the country and the government to put in place, large structural reforms. Of course, from here on, both for everybody, including foreign investors and for, as you're saying, for the consumers to finally see the benefit, we need to now put our heads down and really implement all the details that are required to be put in place. The final impact of all this will come after first specifying the details and then actually executing them. But I think, the important step is that we've made a beginning, and I think that itself is a big victory.
Before I let you go, ma'am, and this is the final question really coming your way. All right, you've had a late evening and we apologize for calling you up this late and getting you on air. But thank you very much. Ms. Chanda Kochar there from ICICI Bank. It doesn't get bigger than that voice joining us right here on ET Now. So that's Chanda Kochar of ICICI Bank in a string of our exclusives this evening. This is indeed a momentous discussion as far as the GST is concerned. We're going to get you up next, the second debate that's coming up right here on the show this evening. And we're going to get you Rajiv Lal of ITFC, Harsh Mariwala, Vijay Shekhar Sharma and Deep Kalra, the two new age CEOs, if I may. And those are going to be joining us in just a moment from now.
Before we do that, I do want to take an opportunity to thank our other guests who've been with us patiently through the first leg of this discussion, Mr. Bhargav, Banmali Agarwala, R. Seshasai and D. Shiv Kumar. Thank you so much for being with us in the first leg of the debate. It's been a busy day for all of us. Appreciate you joining us with that perspective on ET Now this evening. Back with that second debate in just a few minutes from now, right here on ET Now.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.